Good morning, just here on St Albans Head in Purbeck. Just having a quick walk, having a look at this from the perspective of Choughs and Cirl Buntings as well. Cirl Buntings are on the cusp of naturally recolonising Dorset. So yeah, Cirl Buntings basically are in the area and have been for a couple of years, and Choughs could be reintroduced. Some linnets going through. What's that up there? It's a grey heron just flying over. So there's a lovely open arable landscape. Don't know how much of it is owned by the National Trust, but as much spring cropping as possible here would definitely be beneficial to farmland birds. Things like corn buntings and obviously Cirl buntings. These hedges are quite closely, there's a starling going over. Would allow these hedges to grow a bit thicker. There's obviously no hedge on this side. Certainly from a Cirl bunting point of view, you want a few more thicker hedges. You get widely dispersed pairs probably in this kind of habitat, but if you want a decent density, which is what you need really, then better hedges, although it's probably traditionally an open dry stone wall sort of landscape on this limestone. Plenty of material for building walls, so maybe on the coastal strip there's more shrubland type habitat. There are plenty of other areas in Purbeck where you can create nice shrubland, so maybe this is more of a corn bunting stroke, lapwing stroke, stone curlew eventually kind of area, if it can be managed optimally for those kinds of species. So there's not really grass margins along the edge of these walls to speak of. Don't want to talk too much because I listen out for singing Cirl buntings. Encombe Estates, it looks like it's all private rather than National Trust owned. Plenty of skylarks. Looking great for Choughs, generally speaking, as in a nice open coastal landscape. We'll come up to it in a minute, the kind of the cliff top habitat or cliff face habitat. Obviously limestone cliffs here. A few hares around, which is nice, out in these big arable fields. So yeah, from a corn bunting point of view, they're boxing over there, the hares, chasing each other around. It's rather cool. So for corn buntings, they're going to be nesting out in these cereal fields. Assuming there are corn buntings here still, there certainly used to be. So spring barley, spring cereals, ideally barley. Low inputs, you've got broadleaf weeds, so they can go for the sawflies, which will have overwintered in the stubbles and emerge for, well, corn buntings and grey partridge, that kind of thing. So yeah, an understory of annual wildflowers within the cereal crops, spring cereal crops, so a nice open spring cereal crop. Probably also get lapwing. Don't know if they, I very much doubt they still nest here. They certainly used to breed here, out in the arable. Whether they would recolonise is anybody's guess. They're virtually extinct now in Dorset. I remember when I was with the RSPB 15 years ago, we had a lapwing recovery project in Dorset. Didn't really work. And we were really focused on cranbourne chase and where there are stone curlews as well. Kind of trying to get lapwing plots, stone curlew plots, but working better for lapwing, which really means bigger. So if you want lapwings to nest, you really want whole field spring crops, or ideally summer fallow, but whole fields rather than small 1 or 2 hectare plots, because they depend on having those hares over there having great fun. Shame I can't zoom in, but yeah, the lapwings need a bigger group of lapwings than can be fitted within a 1 or 2 hectare stone curlew plot. Stone curlew plots are 2 hectares, the ones up in Wessex, but and in Breckland, but 1 hectare is ploughed early in the spring, the other hectare is ploughed midsummer, so they can get 2 broods. Tractor going past. I won't say anything whilst he's going past. Oh, yeah. But yeah, so really with a stone curlew plot you only really have 1 hectare suitable in the spring for the lapwings, and that's not big enough. For a good group of lapwings, they depend on group for predator kind of avoidance and predator distraction and chasing predators away basically. So just 1 pair hasn't got much of a chance, whereas 5 pairs on a nice big arable field like this, if it's summer fallow, would certainly have a chance of defeating predators to some extent. So bigger plots for lapwings, whole field fallows ideally, and the great thing about whole field fallows is that when the turtle doves return in the spring, they also have a nice weed rich kind of summer or kind of spring migration food resource area basically, because they're an obligate seed eater turtle doves. So having whole field fallows ready and waiting for them when they return in spring. So basically the females need to put on, well, they both need to put on loads of fat, but it's the females that are producing eggs, so they're particularly dependent on fattening up again after they've depleted their fat reserves on the migration. So they really need these summer fallow fields or spring crops, or spring, weedy stubbles that have come out of the previous year's spring cropping. Those weedy stubbles, if they're still around when the turtle doves are migrating through, which they usually aren't, but if they can be, then that provides a weedy spring habitat for turtle doves as well. Nice field margin here, nice tussocky field margin. And this is what corn buntings were like, these margins, mainly because the invertebrates will move from the margins out into the crop, which is where the corn buntings have their nests, and they're looking for food in the arable basically over the summer. Grey partridges would love these field margins as well, and eventually Cirl buntings if they start to nest here again. This is where they're getting their grasshoppers. It does need a bit more, this fence line really ought to be a hedge line, or I know this is St Albans Head, so it's probably a much more open landscape, but pockets of scrub like you've got on this side, so I shouldn't say scrub, pockets of shrubs as you've got on this side, but allowed to grow a bit taller, a bit thicker, is what the Cirl buntings are after, and the yellowhammers and linnets, and nice skylark there right on the edge of the margins. Plenty of skylarks. I'm drowning them out by talking too much. And another one. Just coming up to a nice deep coombe with limestone grassland. Definitely feels more Cirl bunting-y this kind of area. So what they need for summer nesting, well actually it's start this time of year, Cirl Buntings, they're under real pressure, the seed eaters at this time of year, because the seed has been depleted from what little winter stubble there is, and it doesn't look like much at all here. But those areas of winter stubbles, everybody who eats seeds is in there eating the seeds, and they've all been depleted by this time of year, so this is the hungry gap for Cirl bunting. But yeah, what Cirl buntings need are overwinter stubbles, cereal stubbles, ideally barley, and a fair bit of it, so probably 4% of the arable, well 3 or 4, maybe 5% of the arable as weedy stubbles, and those stubbles to remain in place and rich in seeds into March. Basically, we're now mid-March, so now they're still feeding on these stubbles because there just aren't enough invertebrates available yet. There soon will be plenty of invertebrates, so they'll be switching their prey kind of preference to invertebrates again, back to invertebrates. But if you're to sustain a population of Cirl buntings here through a cold snap, we've not really had a proper cold snap in the last few years when the birds have been recolonising. But if you do get a really bad cold snap now, say, and you certainly can get a cold snap now, if you get snow covering these fields, then they're in trouble basically, because the seed has already been depleted and now it's covered by snow. Skylarks there, sorry to disturb you. This is great looking habitat though. I could well imagine a pair or two of Cirl buntings here. It was kind of a stubble fallow field over there. Can't see anything over there. That looks nice though. No yellowhammers yet. Bit of a surprise. But yeah, so the Cirl buntings are wintering in cereal stubbles. This is the conventional way of thinking about Cirl buntings, by the way. I'll get onto the Cirl buntings and rewilding in a minute. But yeah, what Cirl buntings need from now onwards, you know, from spring into summer, are kind of shrubby habitats. So shrublands, lots of thorny shrubs, hedgerows, thick hedgerows, or scattered shrubs in tussocky, species-rich grassland. I mean, it doesn't need to be species-rich so much as tussocky, so this bank here is perfect Cirl bunting foraging habitat. And they're going for invertebrates, but as the summer progresses, they're increasingly going for grasshoppers and bush crickets. And grasshoppers need a mosaic, you know, tussocky mosaic with bare ground. So you've got all the components for grasshoppers here. Not this time of year, be very early installs at the moment, probably not even emerging yet. But later in the year, June, July, August, September, this will be full of grasshoppers. And this is where the Cirl buntings will be foraging. You've got bare ground there for the grasshoppers to bask, lay eggs in the tussocks and around this kind of area. So yeah, they need shrubby habitat embedded within grassland, which is rich in grasshoppers basically, and bush crickets on the shrubs themselves as well. Let's see, looks like a footpath goes that way. I'm going to carry on this way, I think. So yeah, a message to the conservation community here in Purbeck is yes, the Cirl buntings are beginning to colonise Dorset. But it doesn't mean that they're not going to fizzle out again if there's not enough wintering habitat. Plenty of summer breeding habitat in Purbeck, so that's not the problem, although you could do a lot more to create a lot more prime habitat. But wintering habitat, I would suggest putting some more in. I'm certainly not seeing much here on St Albans Head. There may be enough here. Needs to be mapped out really to be sure. like I say, but 4 hectares per square kilometre of arable, 4% would be ideal of prime wintering habitat. And that combined with this lovely shrubland type habitat, plenty of thrushes in here, song thrushes. I thought that was a redwing over there, but it's a bit late for those. They should be moving on by now. Another song thrush. Blackthorn coming into flower just there. Well into blackthorn flowering time now, really. What's that calling? So I can hear red-legged partridge. I wonder if there's grey partridge here. Probably not, but you never know. What is that calling? It's a thingy. Can't remember what it is. Anyway. Oh dear, I'm hopeless. Nice grass margins over there again. So I did just say I was talking about the conventional view on what Cirl Buntings need, i.e. winter cereal stubbles. That's not their ancestral habitat, pre-agriculture obviously, but also bear in mind they are an invasive species in the UK, so they did colonise in response to the arrival of farming. Well, it was only in the whatever it was only not so long ago. This quarry looks promising for choughs. Anyway, yeah, so Cirl Buntings. So in Iberia, they don't really depend on weedy stubbles. They also feed on meadows and various other habitats. And there's documentary kind of evidence that they would also winter on sheep walks on the Sussex coastal plain as well. So chalk grass and those kind of paths that sheep create, their desire line paths, would trap a lot of seed, and yellowhammers and Cirl Buntings would feed on those walks, those livestock walks in winter on those seeds. But I think it's fair to say in the UK, all the evidence suggests they do need pockets of stubble, seed-rich, disturbed ground basically, that remains seed-rich into early spring, into now really March. So you might say, well, wild boar or pigs or other large mammals would create the disturbed ground and therefore the seed-rich habitat, so you don't need stubble. So in rewilding type projects, like the ones I'm working on in Liscombe, couldn't they just feed on those pig disturbed areas? Potentially yes, but it does depend on seed depletion rates. So if everyone's feeding, all the linnets and the yellowhammers and the Cirl Buntings are all feeding in those relatively small areas of disturbed ground, it's more than likely the seed is going to be very rapidly depleted. And that's why having very seed-rich, optimally managed stubble fields, which is a proven habitat for wintering species later in the winter into the early spring, I think is a stopgap until we know for sure whether pigs and your large mammals in your rewilding shrubland habitats can sustain seed-eating birds throughout the winter into the early spring. I'm doubtful personally, but we're not Iberia. We don't have those kind of year-round flowering seasons basically in the grassland habitats. and very disturbed habitats with fires and lots of wild boar and lots of some ploughed patches and some hay meadows that are mown, and so I think in order to help Cirl buntings to sustain their toehold over the winter, we do need patches of winter stubble habitat. Nice field margins here. Tell me what you think in the comments section, whether you think that's a fair kind of view to come to. Now I think we're coming up to St Albans Head, or to the tip. Let's just have a look on the map on the phone. Yeah, not far off, near the chapel. So as for chaff, this looks like, notwithstanding it's all arable, but we'll get to some good grassy habitat in a minute, I think. But this looks like a prime chaff landscape. So as I've said in a previous video, my view is that there were chaff here. There were chaff throughout the south coast in suitable cliff type habitats back in the day, and I think what drove them to extinction, at least on the Isle of Wight and more than likely in Purbeck, was persecution because of folklore. Chaff, their Latin name is, can't remember what their Latin name is, but it's a fire, pyro something or other. So they were believed to start fires in thatch roofs and that kind of stuff. That was a long time ago. We've kind of got over that myth now. The red beak and the red feet and the blackbird. On a blackbird, they're clearly off, lighting fires everywhere in hayricks and in thatch roofs. So they were persecuted because of that bit of folklore, and also, or so I gather, and also over hunting of eggs. So general persecution and harvesting eggs. We used to harvest peewit, lapwing eggs out in these fields, and there's good documented evidence on the Isle of Wight around Knighton of egg collecting on the cliffs, and they would have been harvesting chaff eggs as well as other eggs. So I wonder where the path goes. I wonder if I'm even on a public footpath. I passed the farmer and he didn't say oi or anything, so it should be okay. But yeah, so if that's true, if they are were the main drivers, so over collecting and persecution, over collecting of eggs and persecution of adults and jobs, if that drove them out of these kind of landscapes, whereas habitat change didn't really, then that's interesting. But irrespective, the habitat here is really good for choughs, and I think they're not here because dispersal limitation has prevented them arriving here from Cornwall. They're doing very well in Cornwall, but they haven't yet saturated the habitat, which means there's tons and tons of habitat still on places like the Lizard, where pairs could backfill. So they're kind of spreading out into the best territories, but there's still lots of not quite the best territories that are empty throughout the Cornish coast. What's that sat on the post? It's a corn bunting, finally. So they are still here. It's very good. So yeah, they've not yet saturated the habitat in Cornwall. As they begin to do that, their productivity, juvenile survival will begin to go down. But as they begin to saturate the habitat, they'll begin to disperse further. Currently they're doing that along the North Cornwall coast, not really along the South Cornwall coast into South Dorset, which is interesting in its own way. I think it's more fragmented as you go south, so they've got to get past, from the Lizard they've got to get past Falmouth and that kind of area, which isn't really suitable. Then you've got Roseland, which is suitable. Then you've got another gap until you get to basically Cirl Point, really. There's some habitat in between, but it's much more patchy, so I think spreading along that southern bit of the Cornwall and Devon coast will be slower, and it has proven to be slower. They'll do it eventually, but I think, you know, spreading therefore along the south coast from, say, Cirl Point, you've got a big gap until you get to Portland. You've got some good habitat around, you know, the kind of the East Devon, West Dorset kind of border areas, but really then you get to Portland. Nice close corn bunting there, singing in the crop somewhere. Oh yeah, sat on the crop. God. Very cool. Yeah, prime corn bunting habitat. Probably not that many left, but still prime habitat. Apart from lack of broadleaf weeds in some of the crops. Although it does look pretty good, which is probably why they're here. Yeah, so I think this is a prime area for choughs. I think they're going to be very slow to get here of their own volition through natural recolonisation. So reintroduction is clearly an option. And I think if you were to establish a chough population here, in the right way, there's right ways and wrong ways to go about doing it, but if you were to establish chough here, they'd be really productive just because the habitat quality is so good. You know, there's a really good biomass of invertebrates in limestone grassland, and even in some of this arable. They like to feed in stubble fields in winter, choughs. But they really like the limestone grassland, the kind of the cliff edge, broken grassland habitat with lots of cattle, avermectin-free cattle, so you don't want the anti-parasitic or whatever worming drugs to turn the livestock dung toxic. You want lots of invertebrates in it, and it needs to be cattle because they like cattle dungs, especially oryx dung, especially because they're going for the invertebrates that live in the dung, and also for just grass invertebrates. Can't for the life of me remember the name of the invertebrates they go for, but anyway. So, more corn buntings. There's a few corn buntings here, sat on fence posts. So highly productive population of choughs I think you would have here. And if you can do the same on the Isle of Wight, if you need to, reintroduce them to the Isle of Wight and reintroduce them to Seven Sisters, Beachy Head sort of area, you've got that, you'll have that connectivity, the population connectivity, which is so important between, well, on the south coast from Kent to Seven Sisters and Beachy to the Isle of Wight, Purbeck, Portland, strategic kind of area, which I think is such an important area for long-term recovery of choughs, and then linking back to Cirl Point and on into Cornwall. And choughs will nest in this chapel, and they'll nest in the quarries we went past earlier, and they'll nest in the superabundance of opportunities along the limestone cliffs around Dorset Country Park, here to here on St Albans Head, down to Kimmeridge and Lulworth, and they'll be all over the place, choughs. So I would be impatient and I would get them reintroduced. The habitat's just so good. You know, you could create more habitat with more cattle grazing, more flower-rich limestone grassland and chalk grassland as well, which they would love. Because it's all natural trust. It's the livestock, I believe, are free of chemicals, so the dung is clean. So we are now at the very head. Not going to go to Winspit. Going to go this way towards Chapman's. But yeah, we are now in absolutely superb nesting habitat for choughs. Got this broken grassland and scree peregrine down there. Yeah, it'd be a travesty if we couldn't get choughs back here quickly for a reintroduction project, I think. So obvious to do it. Look at those cavities and caves and hollows in the cliffs. And the kind of the scree, shaly scree limestone with lots of broken ground and lots of probing opportunities. And then just inland you've got the nice peregrine there. Nice to see. You've got these paths where choughs will just feed short grass they really love. Short grass with some tussocks, so I haven't seen any thrift. Got lots of thrift on the chalk on the Isle of Wight, but they create mounds which you can probe under if you're a chough. Collecting your, what are they called? The things that emerge from grass. It's not daddy longlegs, it's the other things that choughs love. But anyway. Probably is daddy longlegs. I don't know. Could stick nest boxes up as well, although I don't think you'd need to in Purbeck because there's so much natural nesting habitat. So scrub that. And I think, oh, look at that cliffs over there, over towards Kimmeridge, I think, and Lulworth. Just endless, brilliant chough habitat. Tell me what you think in the comment section to this video. Do you agree that we should be intervening to bring choughs back and to help the Cirl Buntings to keep their toehold? And what about red-backed Shrikes? It's an interesting species. It's very difficult to reintroduce red-backed Shrike because of very low natal site fidelity. So basically the juveniles that are fledged from a territory, they don't come back to that kind of the vicinity of where they were fledged from. They disperse when they come back. Quite wide ranging. The adults do tend to come back. There's much higher rates of site fidelity with, or philopatry with the adults. So breeding site philopatry is quite high, but natal site is quite low. Lovely chough habitat. It's that I just flushed over there. Meadow pipit. Yeah, so red-backed Shrike is a challenging reintroduction candidate. So because of, you'd need to somehow get around the nesting site, well, the low natal site fidelity. One way of doing that is just to introduce loads and loads and loads each year. You know, big numbers each year. So just the probability that they'll have a low return or low apparent survival, which basically means the ones you detect again back in the landscape, the broad region where you've reintroduced them, release them. You know, you may get a return rate of 8% or 10% or something. So they may not return to the release site. But they will probably return to the region, those individuals that do actually survive their migration. What cracking habitat. But yeah, so what I would do for red-backed Shrike is just create loads of Shrike-ready habitat. as the first kind of task, which means lots and lots of their favoured prey, which are basically larger invertebrates. And there's a group of 4 species groups that they particularly like. So they've got an inordinate fondness for beetles, just like Cirl Buntings have an inordinate fondness for grasshoppers. Red-backed Shrikes love beetles, including those associated with dung, so dung beetles and other related species. So beetles first and foremost, then bumblebees, a close second. So you need lots of wildflowers, you need lots of dung and bare ground and open swards for the beetles to be accessible. And you need lots and lots of flowers in your sward for the bumblebees. So it's no good having species poor, flower poor habitat with lots of shrubby habitat in it. You need flower rich habitat for all the bumblebees. And then they also love grasshoppers again, and odonata, so dragonflies and damselflies. So they need all of that food in high abundance throughout the nesting period, so they can feed their chicks with lots and lots of beetles, bumblebees, grasshoppers and odonata in particular. There's a nice raven there, carrion crow chasing a raven. It's rather lovely, isn't it? So they need that high abundance of larger invertebrates in those groups within mosaics of shrubland and grassland, so widely scattered shrubland, not thickets of scrub. Just like you got in this valley really, the gorse over there, really good for cell bunting, the gorse as well. There's a theme, isn't there, of species rich shrubby grassland being really good for a suite of or a group of species of conservation concern, like Cirl bunting, red-backed shrike, yellowhammers, linnets, turtle dove in particular. They love shrubland habitat. They like the thickets a bit more than the other species do, so bigger clumps of shrubs are good for turtle doves. And disturbance for the seeds and mosaics of short and long grassland. And cuckoo, of course, likes that kind of habitat as well, as do adders and various bats, hedgehogs, dormice. It's just a cracking habitat for a range of species. So we can use these ambassador species like Cirl buntings and red-backed shrike to get a lot more of that kind of habitat in place, and turtle dove. If we can use those ambassador species to get that habitat in place, it's a no regrets kind of habitat creation opportunity, because so many species of conservation concern will benefit. And also, notwithstanding the disturbance and lack of winter seed possibility, it's a habitat you can create through rewilding as well as wildlife friendly farming. So basically both rewilding and conventional farm, high nature value farming can work, can create nice open flower rich shrubland habitat for these species. Choughs are slightly different, they like it more open and windswept, but they do still like the beetles associated with and grubs associated with cattle dung that doesn't have chemicals in it. I'm rambling on a bit now, rambling on. That's a steep hill I've just come up to. Lovely little valley though. I think Chapman's Pool is that little pool that we just went past, maybe. Or are we coming up to it? I'm not sure. It's not really my patch, Purbeck. It's got this very steep hill anyway. I'm getting old, so I need the exercise. So in terms of how you would achieve a chough reintroduction, so I was thinking when I was in the feasibility study for the Isle of Wight, I was kind of taking the conventional view which has been applied in Jersey and currently being applied in Kent, which is that you would have a conservation breeding programme, so you'd have captive choughs producing juveniles that you would then fledge out into suitable habitat. An alternative approach, which I think probably sounds better to me, would be to try and source wild birds from the UK. And you'd have a soft release aviary, and you basically release them at around fledging time as a group. That first cohort, you might release some adults with them, but by year 2, when you're releasing the second cohort, there are now chough in the landscape that they can group up with, and those chough already know the landscape from your first cohort. Phew. Running late now. Lovely limestone cliff faces. So many really good deep cavities for choughs to nest in. Absolutely superb. There's some grassland inland, kind of a corner of grassland here, which is good. So you could possibly maybe do with a little bit more grassland extending a bit further into some of this arable, just because that's what choughs are going to be feeding on, but they'll also feed along these paths. Probably quite disturbed in summer, but you know, they're fine around Land's End, which is pretty disturbed in summer. As far as I know, I don't think disturbance there is causing any issues with productivity. Might be, I don't know if the researchers be, well, yeah, they do collect data on successful fledging, so somebody ought to have had a look to see if there's any variance in productivity where there's more disturbance. I don't think it's an issue, to be honest, and I don't think at St Albans Head it would be an issue. Elsewhere in Purbeck, Dorset, disturbance might be more, you know, intense enough, but then there's more grass than just inland of the coastal strip, so choughs, and more very tightly grazed grassland as well, which is really good for choughs, as long as it's got cattle on it and the cattle don't have worming chemicals in their dung. Then the choughs will just fly over the coastal path straight onto the grassland just inland. And anyway, they'll feed along the coastal grassland at dawn for a few hours before it gets busy, as I've watched them do at the lizard, not quite the needles, eventually the needles. So it looks like galt clay down there underneath the limestone, or yeah, it's interesting. Well, that looks like cracking habitat down in that undercliff. There's kind of a shelf down there. Let's zoom in a little bit. There's a shelf down there where the galt clay, I think it's galt clay, has slipped down, and the grassland, there's lots of scrub along there, but the grassland just is perfect chough foraging habitat. And there's some nice, along there's some, yeah, it must be spring cropping going on here then. Some game cover crops there. So maybe could work with whoever's doing that game cover crops to see if they can create some more wintering habitat for Cirl bunting. Got a nice strip of coastal grassland which looks brilliant for choughs as well. It's all coming together here in Purbeck, I have to say. The great thing about Purbeck also is, you know, not only the good cluster of conservation landowners and the farmers that have been doing a lot themselves, also you've got Birds of Poole Harbour, which is, you know, built up a real kind of specialism in species recovery and species reintroductions. So they're actively working obviously on osprey reintroduction with the Roy Dennis Foundation and others, and they're also you know, nurturing the eagle recovery. Obviously the eagles are released from the Isle of Wight by Forestry England and the Roy Dennis Foundation and others, but they've come into Poole Harbour and around kind of their patch, Birds of Poole Harbour's patch, and so they're doing lots of work to promote eagles. So yeah, Birds of Poole Harbour is a really good organisation in terms of their kind of intellectual capacity to deliver a project such as a chough reintroduction that would be rock solid in terms of methodology, and I would thoroughly support an approach that takes birds from the wild rather than relies on conservation breeding. That's for chough reintroduction. So you've got them who are specialists in reintroduction, then you've got the National Trust, which is the major landowner, and a really, really good team who could work with their tenant farmers to get wintering habitat, more wintering habitat in for Cirl buntings, and create lots of shrike ready habitat potentially. So lots of shrike shrublands, as I call them. I'll try to remember to put a link to my little booklet in the description below this video. Cheeky upsell. What's that down there? Is that a buzzard? Yeah. Don't think you get eagles down here, but it's a buzzard anyway. What a beautiful little bay. Is that Chapman's Pool? So I guess this little bay down here is Chapman's Pool. You can tell I really don't know Purbeck that well. What an exhausting landscape for old gits like me. Good grief. So yeah, we covered 3 species, red-backed shrikes, Cirl bunting and chough. Just trying to think of, oh yeah, the National Trust, bless them, again. Brilliant organisation in Purbeck, as they got the first, or they undertook the first wild reintroduction of beavers, as in the first kind of formal professional reintroduction of beavers. There's been lots of informal releasing of beavers, but what the National Trust have done here in Purbeck is the first professional kind of formal reintroduction, which is brilliant news. Well done, National Trust. And I'm not criticising people that have done the informal reintroduction, because if it wasn't for them releasing beavers in East Devon, we would not have wild beavers in England, and we now have because of what they did. I know it was illegal. I'm not going to condemn it there. Criticise me in the comment section. I'm always happy to be told off, and I very frequently am told off. But yeah, so what other species? I would try a golden eagle somewhere in England soon. It's an obvious species. They would fit into much of the English landscape, just as white-tailed eagles have proven to be very much at home in southern England. I'd probably go for somewhere in Devon for golden eagle. What else? Wild cat. Yeah, Purbeck's suitable for wood cats, I would have thought. Whether it would be an early place to try it, I don't know really. If I was working in Purbeck, I'd probably be pushing for it, at least pushing for work to look into the feasibility of wildcat reintroduction. And pine marten, obviously. What a lovely landscape. Tiring but lovely. I've not seen any other people yet, apart from the farmer and his tractor. So I might as well do a very quick recap, a very quick summary of what I've been saying. So Cirl bunting create more wintering habitat. You've got lots of summer breeding habitat, but little patches of wintering habitat, probably one hectare plots within thick hedgerows or shrubland plots of spring barley with lots of weed in the stubble. Open stubble, very open stubble, lots of bare ground. They don't like bumblebird crops particularly. Unlike lots of other species, they like really open stubble Cirl buntings. So 4% of that, so 4 hectares per square kilometre of arable. So that's 4% of arable rather than 4% of farmland. Up to 4%, you know, don't want to do overkill, they don't need that much. That's for Cirl bunting. So winter stubble and lots of grasshopper-rich shrubland, grassy shrubland habitat. Choughs, reintroduction is a no-brainer in my view. Get on with it, get going with it, because the habitat around Purbeck is superb for choughs. Could be made better or not made better. You could make even more really good habitat. There's already enough here for them. I mean, look at it. This is really good for choughs. And red-backed shrike create loads and loads of flower-rich, shrubby habitat. There's a theme, isn't there? Shrubby habitat. Broken shrublands though, not dense thickets of scrub or shrubs, which turtle doves do like, but red-backed shrikes like it more dispersed. And yeah, and consider supporting the reintroduction of red-backed shrike, which Natural England is leading on. I'm going to stop talking now and just walk, so to enjoy the rest of the walk I might say something, might even bump into a Cirl bunting, you never know. Prime time for them to start singing really, not quite on territory yet because they're still depending on the seed in the stubbles at this time of year, but they'll be gradually moving through and finding suitable territories and singing. They sing it when they're on the stubble as well at this time of year. Not very much, especially at low density. They can be really, really hard to detect, Cirl buntings, when there are very few of them, because they just don't bother singing. I'm guessing there that they just don't bother. I don't know why. You know, it's alley effect, I suppose. The higher the density, the more the singing. They tend to group in little clusters of pairs, and they sing away to each other. But if there's not a cluster of pairs, which is 1 or 2 pairs spaced out, they're just not going to be territorial particularly. They've got no need to sit there for hours on end singing away so that we can detect them. So they don't really have any neighbours singing to them. I'm hoping the path strikes right just up here. I can see a public right of way sign, and that should take me back to the car park. It's a lovely walk. It's a shame about the big dip that I've just had to navigate because I'm way too old to be doing that now. That was a message to Rob, my boss. I'm way too old to be doing massively long hikes, which we did yesterday at Woodbury, Wild Woodbury. Is it Woodbury? Yeah. Totally exhausted after that, and I've done another one this morning. It's now 8 in the morning, and what a cracking morning it is too. And it's World Rewilding Day, I believe. So that's good. Yeah, I can say something on the relationship between rewilding and the kind of the tried and tested and proven conservation management we've all got used to in the UK. So rewilding is very much the new kid on the block, and it's quite assertive and quite kind of in your face. It's what I do at Liscombe, and it's what I'm really into now is rewilding, but it is can be a bit arrogant at times. We need to be blending the tried and tested, the conservation management, which we're looking at now basically, need to be blending that with rewilding rather than trying to pretend that one is better than the other, because it isn't. We need wildlife friendly farming and conventional, traditional, proven conservation management of habitats, and we need large scale rewilding, which doesn't involve habitat management, it is very open-ended. So conservation management, the traditional chalk grasser management and creating wildflower strips along hedgerows and that kind of stuff, that is target driven, that has an ends objective. So it's for grey partridges, corn buntings, arable weeds if it's a cultivated margin, all proven stuff that works very well, and we need to continue doing that and encouraging farmers to do it as much as possible in places like this. Rewilding doesn't have those ends objectives as such. You can have hypotheses, so we hypothesise at Liscombe that the arable reversion and the kind of improved grassland areas will turn gradually into flower rich, shrubby habitat initially, good for red-backed shrikes, etc. So that's that theme again, and then gradually turn into kind of a wood pasture type area with some closed canopy woodland. So we can hypothesise that's what's going to happen because of the kind of the things we do early on to address anthropogenic issues. What we're not going to do is say we're going to manage it so that to make that happen, because that's not what rewilding is for. We just have a hypothesis that that's how the landscape's going to develop, and we may be surprised, pleasantly surprised. And I don't agree with the people that say, well, that's not good because you don't have any targets, you don't know what you're going to deliver. Well, you do on the vast majority of the countryside, because you're doing target-led conservation on farmland and on RSPB nature reserves, etc. So yes, you do it on those kind of places, and then on other places, rewilding sites, you do open-ended process-led projects. So it's not either or, so it's not really right to criticise rewilding when concurrently with rewilding we're doing vastly more conventional conservation management of habitats. They both, I do both basically. I go out delivering farm management advice on farmland, not this area, but in North Dorset and elsewhere, and that is conventional target-led conservation advice. But I also do rewilding, and we should be able to do both of them without criticising one or the other. Well, we can criticise one or the other. I criticise wildlife-friendly farming, and I criticise rewilding, so we can critique the approaches, but we shouldn't dismiss them. One big critique that's kind of emerging is the whole indirect land use change problem. So when we arguably at a global level, when we withdraw land from food production in the UK, we might drive habitat loss, or the loss of more species-rich, rarer habitats elsewhere globally. I think it's definitely an issue that we need to address. Kind of depends on what areas you're taking out of production in the UK, really. If it's very low yielding, rubbishy, low potential farmland that really isn't producing food as such, it's just producing biofuels or sheep that are subsidised, well, not really these days, kind of, sort of, then it's probably going to have less of a indirect land use change effect. But anyway, yeah, it's an issue. it's related to land sparing and land sharing, I suppose. And there's a risk, you know, it's not only rewilding that risks indirect land use change, it's also wildlife friendly farming, to the extent that it reduces yield per hectare of farmland. Then that yield has got to be gained somewhere else if demand is held constant, if you see what I mean. And so that by meeting demand elsewhere, you could cause land use change elsewhere. If that land use change elsewhere is into habitats that are of a higher value than you've created, then it's a problem. Right, we are near enough back at the car, which is a great relief, because I need to get back to the Springfield Hotel for day 3 of the Rewilding Britain Rewilding Network get together on this rewilding day, World Rewilding Day.